Welcome to Village in Motion. It's August 23rd. I'm Clint Lambert, the host today, with our discussion about wine with Jim Coulter, who is our local resident guru or enophile, which means a wine connoisseur. And we're just really glad to have Jim with us today, and we're going to talk about wine this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Clint. How are you today?
Doing great. And yourself, Jim?
I am excellent.
Great. Okay. What is really happening with all the different wine? I noticed in the paper this morning that Dusty Baker now has his own winery. I mean, seems to be a new trend now for people to get into wine. What's happening?
Well, it's something that started, I guess, back in the 60s and 70s. You started to find celebrities were buying land or would buy an existing winery. Greg Norman is one. I remember that now he has his own line of wines and stores and so forth. He's one of the first names that I noticed did that.
So he has a white shark wine.
Yes. In fact, the shark is his logo on his wine bottle.
Yeah.
Ernie Els. I think Arnold Palmer was in a winery for a while. Jack Nicklaus. I know lots of people in show business. I think Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt had a winery in France that they bought, and were trying to figure out how to divvy up when they split.
So one got the Merlot and one got the Shiraz.
Apparently, one red and one white, or whatever. But the interesting thing about it is that, you would know this firsthand. If you have a lot of money to invest, it's not a bad investment in that worst case scenario. You can drink up your product if you can't sell it to anybody, but the initial investment to start a winery, you've got to buy land. I think Dusty Baker, this article in the paper today, started with 2 acres.
With 2 acres in California.
And now he's got enough product that he can afford to start selling it here, since he has name recognition in the district. But there was an article a year or so ago in the Wine Spectator about the price of winery lands in Napa Valley, which of course is the premier grape growing region in California.
And that really started in the 60s and 70s, didn't it?
Yeah, they had a wave of, in fact, it started in the 1860s.
Okay.
And went on for about 10 years. People would open wineries there. Some of which Beringer and Schramsberg are still going today. And then it sort of faded out. And then in the 1960s to 1970s, Robert Mondavi and a bunch of the other people opened theirs, and French started to invest there. So it looks like it goes in cycles, and we've seen that here in Virginia too. They didn't seem to do anything for a while, and then doctors and lawyers getting close to retirement started buying land and starting wineries.
And now what we have, like 260 wineries?
I think it's almost 300 now. I think it's up in the 280s or 290s. The last map I got from the Virginia Wine Place that shows you where they all are had the number. I was surprised that it was that many. But in Napa a few years ago, vineyard property was selling for between $50,000 and $750,000 an acre. And you can imagine if you had to go to Napa and buy 5 acres of land for, let's say, $500,000 an acre, you got $2.5 million worth of dirt.
Yes.
Then you've got to buy, unless it's an existing vineyard, you've got to buy the seedlings to plant X hundred of them per acre or X thousand of them per acre. And then you have to wait 2 or 3 years for them to start producing grapes. Then you got to buy the equipment, have to hire the staff. You got a huge initial investment.
Yes.
Wine barrels cost $1,000 or more, depending on whether they're made with expensive oak from France or from Tennessee, and that could be a difference of $200 or $300 a barrel there. And if you need 2,000 barrels, And you're talking big money, so
Yes.
it's not surprising when you see a winery wants $100 for a bottle of their wine.
Right. Well, I was just, in regards to just like noticing this morning in the paper about Dusty Baker's with what's Dusty's Wine, I think is what it's called now.
Yeah.
The fact that it's being sold for $20 to $45 a bottle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's from what I understand, he doesn't have a lot invested in the land. He's buying grapes that farmers
Right.
are growing, or people that have vineyards are selling him their excess production.
So in other words, he's not producing the juice, he's buying the
right,
juice.
He's growing some of his grapes.
Okay.
And I know he started with 2 acres. I don't know how much he's got now, but if he's making enough to put it on the market, he's probably buying grape juice or buying the grapes in addition to that.
Okay.
And grapes are selling for, I read this morning, so my short-term memory's already forgotten. But Cabernet Sauvignon is selling for just a couple of years ago was selling for just under $6,000 a ton.
Wow.
And in Napa, Cabernet Sauvignon is far and away the top grape that they produce there. But Chardonnay is probably the second most popular one, and it's selling for about half of what the Cabernet Sauvignon sells for.
So, and that's not cheap.
No, and when you, I used to know, because we talked about this several years ago, is how many bottles of wine you can get out of a ton of grapes, but it's not nearly as much as you would hope when you're buying grapes by the ton.
Well, the other thing that I learned in visiting wineries, they've got to have a certain volume that they can produce before you can move out of your local area.
Right. Well, it's like making cars or refrigerators. You have to what they say in business, you have to make your nut, which is your cost of the staff, the pay your the monthly loans,
keep the lights open.
Yeah, basically keep the lights open. So you have to have a certain basic minimum production that you have, which is why one of the things they mentioned in this article about the price of the vineyards and the price of wine, and so where there's the things that a lot of the winemakers talk about now is limited production. They've spaced the grapes out, so we're only producing so many grapes. But when you get down past, a half a ton per acre or 3/4 of a ton per acre, economically you're not going to be bringing in enough money unless you're fortunate enough to have inherited the property, from your grandparents. But even then, in California, especially, you got taxes.
Right.
Wazoo is a good California word. That's apparently where the taxes are you're paying them out. Because no, you between the county, maybe a municipal tax if you have a store downtown. I know there's one of the wineries that my wife and I and some friends visited out there is right on the border between Napa and Sonoma counties. And they've got a line painted down the middle of their parking lot where the county lines are, and they've got separate buildings on either side of that line for crushing the grapes. Because the stuff they bring in from Sonoma County is crushed in Sonoma County, and then when it's bottled, the production, they keep track of what percentage goes into each bottle.
Wow.
Because the taxes in Sonoma are about 1/3 as much as the taxes in Napa. And if $1.50 out of each bottle is going for Napa taxes, they want to make sure Sonoma is only getting 50 cents for theirs. And that's so they probably have one bookkeeper that just keeps track of that stuff.
But that's an important part of it because
It is.
People forget wineries are in the business of making money.
They hope they are. Anyway. That's their plan.
And if they're not making money, then it's kind of like, why are we in business?
That's right. Well, it's and if you've got 2 acres of land, then you make 300 or 400 bottles of wine a year.
Right.
And you can do what Dusty started off doing is you can give them away to your friends. Autograph the label and give it to friends. But after you drink your 365 bottles of wine one a night every night for a year,
Yeah.
and give away what's left, why, it's you have probably paid more for those bottles of wine than if you went down to the local wine store or drove 3 miles down the road to the next winery
Yes.
and bought his bottles from him.
Right, exactly.
So it's producing it yourself is a lot of fun, and I'm sure it's something that these people that get into it, for the most part, do it because they enjoy wine,
Right,
and so
yes,
we're,
right.
or they're farmers, and I know Will and Edna Brill live here,
Right.
and their brother-in-law, is a,
right,
yeah,
yes,
is a farmer
Right.
out there and grows grapes and would sell them to other people, and he
Yes.
would make some of his own into wine. But most winemakers will tell you that you're paying too much for that juice to be drinking it yourself. You want to sell that. You
Right.
could buy somebody else's cheaper.
But the important thing to realize with that is the fact that the grape is the same as what you're labeling it as, in regards to,
Yeah.
and regardless of where it's actually grown, or by which grower
Yeah,
grows it.
Cabernet Sauvignon grapes from Napa are Cabernet Sauvignon grapes from Napa, whether they're grown on expensive land or
Right.
cheap land. And in case of a lot of wines, the better quality wines come from cheaper land that's not such high quality that you can't grow other crops on it.
Right.
One of the
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
you've got some stuff about minerality, right?
Yeah, there was a study that was just done in Spain about a lot of people say they can taste different things in wines, whether it tastes like raspberry or tastes like strawberry. Minerality is one of those things that some people say they can taste, especially in white wines.
Right.
In France, in Bordeaux, the soil is gravelly, and some of their white wines are said to taste minerally. And in Champagne, it's chalky
Right.
soil there, and they say that makes the flavor of the champagne different. So they did a study in Spain. They had a bunch of ordinary consumers, Spanish consumers, of course, drink a lot more wine than we do, so they're not ordinary. But they had all these people taste a bunch of these different wines, and they decided which ones tasted more minerally.
Okay.
So then they had 2 panels of experts. One panel was winemakers, and another one was wine writers and wine connoisseurs and restaurateurs and people like that. And they tasted the wines that the consumers said were more minerally. So they took the wines that those 2 groups identified as the most minerally and sent them off to a laboratory where they did a chemical analysis of the wines, and they did a chemical analysis of the other wines that were left over from the study that didn't taste as minerally, and they found the ones that people thought tasted minerally had more of certain chemical substances in the wine. And so what they're now doing as the result of that, they're trying to identify what it is about those chemical substances that makes them taste minerally. And I presume that they will find that some of them might be what makes them taste minerally, or maybe all of them in combination together make it taste minerally. But I presume if somewhere down the road somebody can identify what chemicals they can add to their wines to make them taste more minerally, somebody will start doing that.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it's kind of like the fact that in Napa, when they first got started and they were making the white wines, and I remember they had all these different chemicals in it in order to extract the redness out of it, of the grape. So.
Yeah, that's always been the problem with winemaking, or chemistry generally, but especially winemaking, but perfume and other things would be the same, is they can make a liquid that tastes or smells or looks a certain way, but then they have to add chemicals into it to stabilize it, to make it stay that way, or they have to extract certain chemicals out of it so that it doesn't deteriorate as fast. And doing that changes the complexion of it. Since wine is a living organism, why they try nowadays to put as few chemicals or use as few chemicals as they can in the wine, unlike a lot of the other things we drink where there are all kinds of chemicals put into them to try and make them taste better or different or stabilize the chemicals.
One of the things that you mentioned is the fact that not only with the minerality of the area, but isn't it also imperative that they get a good vine, and that so many people want the part of the original, the old vine out of Italy?
Well, part of it is that the older vines had a different thing, and what happened in California and in Europe is 100 years ago, they had this root louse that would attack the old European style vines like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And what they did in California was they would cut the top of the plant off and graft the vine onto the Native American rootstocks, which were immune to that. And they started selling those all over the world. Most of the vineyards in France, when they were infected with this, replanted on the American rootstock. The vines in South America never had that problem, so they're still growing the old rootstock that they imported from Europe, 150 years ago down there. Now they're having another problem in California right now. They got these little bugs that fly around and eat the leaves or so forth. So now they're trying to figure out, what they can do. They've had to replant a bunch of vineyards out there to
and they've got to be careful about what they spray.
Yeah, they don't want to spray. They're trying the traditional. They'll import wasps. They'll genetically modify the wasps so they can't breed, but they'll release thousands of them into the vineyards and let them go around and kill the other bugs. It's like any other agricultural business. If you got tomato plants or rose bushes and you start having problems with them, you don't want to spray your tomatoes with all kind of DDT and so forth, unless people are stealing your tomatoes out in the garden, in which case maybe you do want to spray them with stuff. But it's an ongoing battle in the agricultural business. If you're growing crops, you're going to have weather, you're going to have pests, you're going to have all kinds of things. The encroachment of people building office buildings right across the street from your vineyard that blocks the sun or changes the way the wind blows through. It's a never-ending battle for these guys to stay ahead of things.
And then once you get the grape and it's been crushed, you've got the juice, then to ferment that, and how long do you ferment juice?
Ordinarily, fermentation takes 2 to 3, 4 weeks. It depends. What they do is they take the grapes, they crush the grapes. If you're making a red wine, you put the grape juice and the skins of the grapes in a big vat, and you let that sit for a week or 10 days. Usually what they'll do is they'll pump the juice out of the bottom back over the top, or they'll push down the floating skins so that they get as much mixture between the grape juice, which is clear to start with, and the skins that are red, so that they get the color leached out of the skins. Then they pump the juice off and they inoculate it with the yeast. And the yeast business is big too, because they have to buy a certain kind of yeast, and depending on the winemaker's taste or the cost of the yeast, or whether you're trying to make one that tastes more like French wine or Australian wine, you would use a little different kind of yeast.
And how long do you put the yeast in, right?
And they put the yeast in, and then the yeast converts the sugars, the natural sugars, into alcohol, and they take readings with a Brix scale, hold it up, the refractometer, and when the amount of sugar and alcohol are at the balance that they're looking for, whether it's 10% alcohol or 14% alcohol, then they use cold to stop the fermentation.
Interesting.
And pump it into barrels and start aging it. And they'll age it for anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years, and then they'll bottle it, and then they may let the bottles sit for a year or two before they put those on the market. It's a lengthy process, and if you've got $700,000 worth of wine that you're sitting on for 3 or 4 years, your carrying cost of that money, of course, hopefully you're selling off previous year's harvests.
Right, exactly.
But it's a lengthy process to go from buying a piece of land until you sell your first bottle of wine, and then you've got to sell a lot of bottles of wine. As we find here in Virginia, they open new wineries and they want $25 or $30 a bottle, and they get 10, 15 years into things, they can start selling them for $15 a bottle as they've started to pay off some of that debt.
Exactly. And they've got, as we said earlier, they've got to be able to produce enough bottles in order to make it worthwhile. Which also then means you've got to have a distribution system.
Yeah.
You've got to have someone that's out there, getting new contacts and selling wine to new people. And one of the things I've always found interesting is in the column that's always on Wednesdays in food section of the Washington Post, is that they will list where the wine can be found within the Delmarva area. And I've always found that very interesting, how it changes depending on which things they're advertising or they're talking about.
Well, the wine distribution is a huge business in and of itself. When we were doing those wine tastings here at Green Spring, I know that you and I and a couple other people, I think, met with the guy who does the distribution, and he had a ream of paper that must have been an inch thick, printed on both sides, that listed all of the wines they had for distribution. And there were some that he didn't distribute because some other distributor in the area had the rights to those wines. So it's not only a big business, but I mean, if you go to a wine store like Total Wine over here and you see how many different wines they have, if you read the label, it'll tell you, imported by Casella Importers in Centerville, Virginia, or something.
Means what? What does that actually mean?
What's that's the business that is whose business is to go out and find wines. They do all the documentation that the government requires, and they have the wine shipped from, say, France, cases or containers or whatever of wine, and it comes in here to the importer. And we should take a camera crew and go down to the warehouse here sometime and do that, because they've got a big warehouse down here in Virginia, and they import the wine to their warehouse where they break it down and store it, and then they ship it out to the different stores, to the stores or restaurants or whoever their customers are.
Interesting. You mentioned containers, and we've got about 3 minutes left, and I want to just cover about containers for a second. And I understand there's some new containers out there for wine?
Well, there are, yeah. You can buy wine in the old-timey, old-fashioned glass bottle, or you can buy it in metal beer cans, aluminum beer cans. We've talked before about they come in cardboard boxes with a plastic insert inside of them, like a little balloon.
It's like a bladder, and
it collapses as the wine comes out, so the wine never comes in contact with the air. And one of the new things now that they're doing in restaurants is they have like a beer tap, and they have a keg of wine underneath the counter, and they've got usually it's a metal steel thing like a keg of beer, but they also
like a pony keg.
Yeah, but they also have plastic ones that have a bladder inside, and the big thing for the restaurant is they don't have to handle 12 cases of wine or something. They got 260 bottles equivalent goes into one of those kegs, and they can sell it by the glass. And they tell you that that means that the consumer is saving money.
Right.
Because instead of you buying they buy the wine for $15 a bottle and sell it to you for $15 a glass.
Right.
And then that way, if they only sell one glass, they don't lose money on it. So the keg, they can buy the wine for $10 a bottle equivalent, and they still sell it to you for $15 a glass, but they tell you it's better for you. I'm not sure how that works, but it's better for them. And I was thinking places like our bistro here.
Yes.
You know, instead of them handling all those little bottles of wine that they sell you, which is handy for you, you can just get the bottle and you can pour it in your glass and so forth. But if they didn't have to handle all those little bottles and store them and stack them, and they don't make a lot of wine in those, you could probably get better quality wine in the tap thing. So I'll give a copy of this to dining services.
Okay. Yeah, please do.
Yeah,
maybe, you never know.
Maybe when they get ready to reposition the bistro,
Right.
they'll think about that.
That sounds like a good idea. It really does. Well, regardless of how you buy it, regardless of where it's from or how it's been grown or produced, it's still something that's nice and refreshing.
Yeah.
Okay. And folks, the summer's almost over. We've been going through summer wines, and now we need to move into...
Drink up all your rosés. Summer's almost over. Time to start shifting back to the big, heavy reds.
That's right. There you go. And as you said earlier, it's always time to start ordering and start getting your supply for Thanksgiving and the holidays. And,
I think I said we got 2.5 shopping months before Thanksgiving, so get out there and buy that Thanksgiving wine.
There you go. Well, Jim, again, as always, it's great having you here with us this morning.
I love being here.
And I think we've had a very nice discussion. Certainly have learned some things, and I hope the residents are comfortable with that. And
I hope most of them stayed awake through the
There we
show.
go. There we go. And regardless of what you buy or how you drink, make sure you eat sensibly, okay? And so take care with that. Don't run away. The announcements today are coming up, and the very first one is a feature programming, and that is on the career.